Well, hi everybody. I don't know if you're going to find this because it took me 7 minutes to figure this out, and I had been pre-testing for 2 hours. So, I don't know what went on, but this is a new link. I will let me see if I can. Yes, I can. I'm going to copy the link and see that helps. Um, I'm going to post it to Facebook. I hope you can still see me. Um, we'll see how this goes. Let's see. Looks like nobody's here yet, so I'm by myself. Okay. Someone is here. Let's see. Trying to figure this out. Okay. Maybe I just go and see how this works. All right, so I'm just going to start talking, and even though it's a new link and maybe people can't find it, they can watch it later. All right, so I think one of the most important things to say, first of all, here we are, and we are talking about a formula crisis that is putting everybody under a lot of stress, including myself as a lactation consultant. And I think a lot of people would think that's weird, that lactation consultants don't have a place in being concerned about people being able to feed their babies formula. But guess what? I'm here to tell you that we do have a place. I, as a lactation consultant, work with families all the time that need to be formula supplementing for medical reasons and also for choice. When there is no formula available, it becomes very, very scary for all of the medical providers that care for mothers and babies. So here we go. First off, everyone deserves to be able to feed their babies and not have to be concerned about where to find food. So I want to put my heart out there and tell all of you that are in this crisis, in the middle of it, and freaking out, that I care about you and I am so sorry. And this is a tumbleweed of many, many problems from a domino effect, which is part of what I'm going to talk about tonight, as well as talk about safety of using formula, things that we can do, and how you can find the formula that you need. And then, of course, I'm going to go into relactation. I'm going to go into induced lactation. I'm going to go into milk donation. I'm going to go into the system that supports mothers and babies, and or how they don't support mothers and babies, and what we can do so that this crisis doesn't repeat itself. All right, I'm going to go, and I have a lot of notes. Okay, so first let's talk about formula and how when you are at the store and the shelves are empty. That's scary. First of all, most babies can thrive on any different kind of formula. You don't have to get a specific kind for most babies. A lot of people get scared that you might have to slowly transition into a new formula, and that's not the case. You can immediately start on a new brand or a new kind, and most babies are going to tolerate that very well. Some babies might have a few days of some discomfort that you notice as their GI kind of gets used to that new formula. That's okay. That's part of it. But please don't feel like you have to slowly transition. It's okay. If you're out of formula and the only one you can find is a completely different brand, use that one. It will be okay. We need your baby fed. There's also brand names. There are off-brand or generic store brand names. Those are nutritionally the same. So you do not have to purchase the um, Enfamil if there is a generic brand alternative. That generic brand will be equitable to what you have been purchasing. Um, Please, another note, do not buy a ton of formula just in case, or buy a ton and hang on to it. There are people out there that need formula, and you need to only buy exactly what you need. Okay, this is not the time to be selfish. This is the time to just collect what we need. I think we all might understand this back from early 2020 when people were hoarding toilet paper and paper towels. Let's not do this again. Please do not hoard formula. Toddler formula. This is milk that is appropriate for typically babies 1 and older. But in this case, 9 months and older can be appropriate. This information, by the way, I am receiving from a pediatrician that I work closely with named Dr. Natasha Berger. And you can find her on Instagram on Casey Docs is her name. Casey Kids Docs. Yes? Yeah, CaseyKidsDoc.com. You can find her on Instagram, Facebook, and she has put together a beautiful written summary and a chart about describing all the different kinds of formula and what you're using and what an alternative might be that's equitable to that. So that is certainly something that I'll be sharing on many platforms so each of you can see, but this is where this information is coming from me. One big thing, please do not home make infant formula. We are in 2022. Yes, in the history of infant feeding, people, I mean, to be fair with you, that's why formula got its name. Because back in the day, the only way you could receive formula was from your physician, and they wrote on a prescription pad. And on that prescription pad, they wrote a formula where you added a certain measurement of this, certain measurement of this, and went home, and that's what you fed your baby. But that is not a good idea to do now. We have babies that are ending up in the ER, children's hospitals, dehydrated, major nutrient deficit. It's not okay. All right. So please do not make your own formula. Not cool. People are talking about EU. So formula that you can get online from Europe. As Dr. Natasha talks about, she has 2 that are FDA approved European style, and those are Bobby and By Heart. Those are boutique formula companies that are made from whole milk products. Take a look at the ingredients, see what's in them. Some of them are going to be sketchy, and I would not go with that one. The FDA is very careful in what they say is safe. So anything you find on the shelves here in the United States is approved by the FDA. Okay, they're all approved. Even if you have a formula that says this one has DHA, this one has special this ingredient, this one has da 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 da. Just so you know, infant formula has a requirement to have nutritionally necessary ingredients by the FDA. So any formula that goes on the market has to have those necessary things. So most of what you see is marketing because they want you to buy that particular brand. So really, we are talking about very, very similar milks. So you don't have to be specialized. Are there babies that need specialized formula? Absolutely. And I want each of you to save that formula milk for those very special babies. Those are those preemies with major diagnoses, those babies who have special needs as far as needing hypoallergenic formula, hydrolyzed formula. There's partially hydrolyzed formula, and then there's extremely hydrolyzed formula. And hydrolyzed means the protein has been broken up into tiny little pieces so that it is easier for the baby to digest, so that their system doesn't have to do that process of breakdown. So it can make them a little bit more comfortable. So let's save that for the babies who need it. The other thing, oh, this one should be clear, but let's please, please, please not water down formula. That is ridiculous. So don't take a can of formula and instead of mixing it per instructions, you add more water to dilute it to make it last longer. That is so extremely dangerous for babies. We can have water toxicity from that and a whole mix of electrolyte imbalance. It's not safe. So don't do that. In fact, tiny little story. Back, God, was this in the, I feel like maybe early 2000s, maybe it was late 90s. I could be completely wrong, but it was a considerable amount of time ago. And Nestle, the company, decided to send a bunch of formula to a third world country. And they sent that over by plane and dropped all that formula off. And what ended up happening in this country, where most women were breastfeeding, was they saw this as a United States help, and they saw that as better. And many of those families began to use formula instead of breastfeed. And they were using water that is not clean and not safe. And so many, 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 many babies died of diarrheal disease. And women stopped making the milk because they stopped stimulating their breasts. They didn't have access to pumps. And it was a huge mess. So watering down formula and diluting is not safe. Please do not do that. And keep in mind as well that the older that your baby is, if you are formula feeding, the less formula they need. So between 0 and 6 months, babies drink the most amount of milk that they will. Infant milk, breastfeeding, breast milk. Between 6 and 12 months, they actually drink less. And why do they drink less? Because they're eating food. So the natural process of infant feeding is breast milk and or formula. And then as they near closer to that 1 year to 2 year age, let's talk 1 year because that's at least the minimum that all babies need, either human milk or formula. They start eating foods and then they move to just foods and water. So between 6 and 12 months, they're not drinking more and more and more and more. They're drinking less. So there's less volume that a family who might be in the middle of this crisis and has a baby who's 8 and 9 and 10 months old, there's less volume that baby needs that you could really begin to supplement with whole foods and make sure you're offering water. And as early as 9 months, you could introduce cow's milk in this case, and the baby will be okay. And no matter what, this is always a good idea to discuss this with your pediatrician, especially for those of you that have those special care babies, getting in touch with your pediatrician. And some of them do have supply that they are very carefully doling out for those babies. Okay, let me check through my notes and make sure. One other one. Goat milk. I have talked about this before, particularly in my Facebook group. I don't have a YouTube about that. I might have put it on Instagram, but it is agreed by pediatricians. Goat milk does not meet FDA approval, so it is not a safe alternative. So this crisis sucks a big fat toe for sure. And people are in a tough place that I wish they weren't. Unfortunately, when we're talking about food that is made in factories and distribution centers, there's error. This is why there's always recall on all kinds of foods for bacterial reasons or others. This is the recall that was recent is not a new thing. Unfortunately, formula has had a long list of recalls. It's just the way it goes when we're talking about milk and infant milk or any food that is made in a factory. And the factory made the correct decision to shut down. And unfortunately, that resulted in a massive lack of supply. So here we are. We don't want this to happen again. And there's a lot of things that we can do to make it so that it doesn't happen again. So let me talk about a couple other things. I'm glad Tom and Monica are here. Other people are going to have to watch this later. But here we go. So relactation, induced lactation, two things that suddenly have become just like falling off the tip of everybody's mouth. I tell you what, out and about, everybody that comes up to me, like even my dearest friends, they'll be like, "Hey, Summer, I have a question for you." And I know immediately what they're going to ask me. I know they're going to ask me about the formula crisis. I know they're going to ask me about relactation or induced lactation. They're like, "How did you know that?" I'm like, because that's what everybody's asking me right now. It's the top of everybody's mind. Both of those things are not easy. Those things have been around forever. And I want to explain a little bit more about it. So relactation. Relactation is where a woman has had a pregnancy, delivered a baby, and been through the process of like original engorgement in the first week postpartum. Even mothers who never planned on breastfeeding and originally formula fed, they still have to go through the process of engorgement. Their milk still comes in. So around day 5 or so, they get engorged, the milk fills up, their body is ready to do this. They haven't been giving stimulation, which was their choice, or for a medical reason or whatever. They chose not to stimulate, or they didn't stimulate. And the milk, because it is in there and not coming out, reabsorbs into their body and goes away. That person would be a candidate for relactation. A person who breastfed and or pumped for a week, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, throw a number out there. And then for whatever reason, weaned or stopped making milk, that person is a candidate for relactation too. Induced lactation is taking pregnancy out of the picture. So someone who has not had a pregnancy and not delivered a baby in this moment, like me. So I have 3 babies that came from my body who many, many years ago I was breastfeeding, but I have not like breastfed in like, I can't do the math right now, but over 10 years. So I haven't had a current pregnancy. So if I wanted to try to start making milk, that would be called induced lactation. Okay. Because I have to trigger my body into thinking that I just had a pregnancy and that I had a delivery. So it's a completely different process, just to clarify for people the difference between relactation and induced lactation. There are some wonderful resources on both of those topics. Relactation, a colleague named Lucy Ruddle has written a phenomenal book entitled Relactation, and it's amazing. It's short, sweet, to the point, and it is a great resource out there. Induced lactation, there's a resource called Newman Goldfarb technique, and that is there's a website with directions on exactly what to do. That one is the toughest of the tough. Okay, that one usually requires estrogen birth control pills for several months, and then stopping and beginning pumping 8 times a day, and just go, 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 go. And that probably would not be something that I would suggest someone to do in the middle of this formula crisis, because the likelihood of that producing volume that would be able to help a child on a long-term basis is like nil, like very, very, very unusual. That's what people do when they're adopting a baby. So we're talking about a long process. Relactation, also not a quick process. It's longer, but more favorable in a situation like this because we're talking about immediacy. With relactation, it can depend on how far postpartum you are. It can depend on at what point did you wean? When was the last time you pumped? When was the last time you breastfed? How long has your body gone without any breast stimulation or nipple stimulation? That can make a huge difference. If I'm talking to a family who is 5 months postpartum and a month ago she was producing milk, then she's going to be better set up to actually begin to make milk again than someone who is 5 months postpartum and 4 months ago stopped stimulating breasts and nipples. It can depend on if they ever were making milk. The woman who didn't ever make milk, mature milk past original engorgement in that first week, she's going to have a little bit of a harder time than someone who comes from having had a full supply and for whatever reason did full weaning and now wants to come back to relactation. That person's going to have an easier time doing it. Things that are important with relactation. Know that you're not going into something that's a piece of cake. Okay. Know that you're going to have to wait for a while and see what happens. And none of us, lactation consultants, physicians, postpartum nurses, none of us can predict how much milk you're going to make. No one can say, oh, in 2 weeks, you'll definitely be making like an ounce per pump. Nobody knows. Everybody's body is very different. And how it responds, or how easily it responds, how susceptible it is, how sensitive it is, we don't know. So we just give you the instructions, hope you're compliant, and do the best that you can and wait and see, which is really frustrating. But while working on relactation, you have to continue feeding the milk that you've been feeding. So one of the probably worst suggestions for someone to say to another person that wants to relactate would be, hey, just start putting the baby to the breast for every single feed. No, that baby is sucking on a breast that is no longer making milk. And that stimulation can be helpful. That stimulation can help things. But we need to make nutritive sucking be on what you've been feeding before and count on this non-nutritive sucking as just hormonal stimulation, as comfort. So one of the better choices would be to feed your baby and then work on attachment and latch, or comfort nursing, or people call pacified nursing. That's better, because you don't want a baby to just be like, oh, here I am nursing on a breast that doesn't make milk, and I'm not going to get milk, and my diaper output's going to go down. I'm going to start losing weight. We can't just do it that way. It needs to be measured. It needs to be proven that you can make milk before we test that baby can actually drain milk from the breasts. And best to be working with a lactation consultant and a physician at the same time. It is recommended during relactation to pump 7 or 8 times a day. That sounds like a lot, especially for someone who maybe has been sleeping through the night. But the more you do, the better. So if someone's like, God, I can't do 8 times a day, but I could probably do 5. Well, do 5. Do 5 times a day and stay committed to that 5 times a day, and let's see what happens. Skin to skin is incredibly important. Gets those hormones kicked in gear as well. But it definitely is it's practice in patience. So it's not something that happens overnight. The process of weaning can be, I don't want to say permanent because we're talking about relactation and induced lactation. But inside the breasts, as we wean, all the milk making cells, they start to die off as we're weaning. And they just like, it's called cell apoptosis, cell death. So they start breaking up, dying, going away. So reactivating that process again isn't easy. So everybody needs to know that relactation is not necessarily the answer. Induced lactation isn't necessarily the answer. But if you want to work towards it, and just put the commitment in there and see what happens, then by all means, go at it. You might start collecting 6 or 8 ounces in an entire day. That is 6 or 8 ounces of formula that you no longer need. Also, very important, if possible, to use a rented, um, really durable breast pump. Often those are rented from like either hospitals or WIC offers those. Some people do it privately. The one I'm most familiar with is the Medela Symphony. They're a couple $1,000s worth of a pump. So renting it usually costs about $50 to $60 a month. But they are what I always say, the Jaguar of pumps. Maybe we could call it the Tesla of pumps, the Ford Mustang of pumps, whatever. They're super strong and they're meant for inducing lactation, relactation, twins, prematurity, NICU, when someone is like essentially abusing that pump and just using it. So you're going to have better results if you're using something like the electric breast pump that's rentable, not just the insurance grade pump. If that isn't possible for you, then the insurance pump is going to be what it is, and you're going to put your effort into it and just go with what you have. Okay, so we talked about relactation, we talked about induced lactation, and we talked about formula and, safe ways to deal with this crisis that we have on hand. Again, I do have a shopping guide with a list of all the different formulas with generic and brand names and alternatives that I will certainly make available. Or if you go to Casey Kids Doc, Dr. Natasha's Instagram, you can find her post about that and put #formula, and she will send that to you as well. But I'd be happy to do the same. Okay, so I'm going to move on to a couple different things. As I mentioned in the beginning, all families deserve to be able to feed their babies. And by that, there is personal choice in feeding method. There are medical needs. And then there's also system failure, which is something I'm going to go into. I am going to answer this question. Sarah just asked, I know there are a couple of medications mothers can take to increase milk supply. Are more mothers trying these medications right now to see if it works to increase their supply? And she says she knows one is not FDA approved, which is correct. The medication that she, I believe, might be talking about is called domperidone. And domperidone is not, you can't obtain that here in the United States. It is, so it can be tricky to get. It's part of the protocol for induced lactation. I am not sure if people are trying to get domperidone, but I know it's going to be like very, very difficult to get that. Of all the medications out there, domperidone and Reglan, which is the other one, are the two that actually have some evidence behind that it can increase milk supply. But let me be clear. That medication is not going to be the reason a woman suddenly makes milk, like if we're talking about relactation. she would need to do all the other things and focus on stimulation, and probably not spend the money on the domperidone, or the Regulin until we have that squared away. Reglan, the other medication, is actually black boxed here in the United States because it has a very high incidence of inducing depression. And a lot of times, these mothers who are in the mix of trying to increase their supply, which maybe we're talking about NICU families, or someone that's a horrible risk to take on. Yes, Sarah says Reglan and domperidone. Yes, those are the two. Anything else is primarily false. So fenugreek, lactation cookies, teas. What is the one that everybody likes to talk about? The drink. Oh my God, I can't remember what it's called. But it's basically a bunch of sugar and tastes really good. Oh, Body Armor. None of those things are going to suddenly make milk. If that were a thing, and I've said this forever, if things that were marketed that you can pick up at the store actually increased milk supply, we wouldn't have mothers with a low milk supply, and we would not be having a formula crisis right now because all the women would just start taking all that stuff. So it's more about, as it always has been, milk removal makes more milk. So when we're talking about relactation and induced lactation, we have to stimulate the breasts and the nipples to gear them up back into making that milk and see what happens. That's a really good question, Sarah. I've had some comments over the last couple of weeks where people are kind of either misunderstanding my message or things that I'm writing, which of course can happen on social media. But comments like talking about breastfeeding during a formula crisis is not appropriate. It absolutely is appropriate. It is where the problem actually has started. So it's not just because of this, because of contamination, which has happened before, and recall. Like many, 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 many of these families in this crisis right now who need formula for their babies started off breastfeeding and or pumping and didn't have plans to formula feed. I understand there are families that start out wanting to formula feed, needing to formula feed, or start out breastfeeding and choose to formula feed at a certain point, or get in a pickle where they have to formula feed. But that pickle often is system failure. So that's something I'm going to talk a little bit about as well. I'm going to share what we call the breastfeeding report card from the CDC. And it is the 2020. That's the most recent one that we have. And this may give everybody a little bit of insight. Okay, I'm going to start off with United States in general. So 84% of infants were ever breastfed. 84%. 58% of infants who are breastfed at 6 months. 58%. And that's not exclusively. That's just who doing any, they could be doing combo feeding and breastfeeding some, 58%. Percentage of infants who are breastfed at a year is 35.3%. Percentage of infants who are breastfed exclusively for 3 months, 46.9. Percent of infants who are breastfed exclusively through 6 months, 25.6%. 25.6% is a really crappy number, okay? The American Academy of Pediatrics, the CDC, the World Health Organization, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medication, the American Academy of Family Physicians, all the bigs recommend exclusive breastfeeding or exclusive breast milk feeding for at least 6 months. And 25.6% of infants are exclusively breastfed through 6 months. Now, I'm not saying this is not many 75% of those leftovers, the people left over that are not exclusively breastfeeding through 6 months, a huge chunk of that 75% wanted to be. And that if they were able to, through the right amount of support and education, and if they were guided in the right path by an educated IBCLC, an educated physician, an educated postpartum nurse, whoever, an educated family member, there would be more formula for the people who medically need the formula and who choose to feed the formula. This is my point, okay? If we can get the people who are breastfeeding and desire to breastfeed, to get them to reach their goals, then there's more formula, even with a crisis, left for the people who medically need it and or have always designed it that way, okay? Percentage of breastfed newborns who receive formula supplementation within the first 2 days of life, 19.2%. So even before they've hit 48 hours of age, there has been formula supplementation. Sometimes that's medically necessary. Many times it's not. And that needs to be talked about. I'm going to read a few other things before I talk about some other things. So I wanted to read some of the percentages. Here's Kansas. In Kansas, exclusively breastfed for 3 months is 51.6. Exclusively breastfed through 6 months is 31.6. Any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months is 37.2. Missouri, any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months, 27.2. Exclusive for 3 months is 42.3%. Exclusive at 6 months is 23.4. New York, any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months is 37.8. Exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months is 45.2%. Exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months is 25.8. And let's go to Texas. Texas, exclusive breastfeeding for 3 months is 45.8. Exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months is 23.9. Any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months is 31.3. Oregon, these are some of the higher numbers, which is very typical for the Northwest. Any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months is 48.4%. Exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months, 65.8%. Exclusive breastfeeding at 6 months, 35.6%. And one more. California. Exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months, 50.1%. Exclusive breastfeeding through 6 months, 28.2%. Any amount of breastfeeding at 12 months is 43.3%. So there are things we need to do. There are things we need to do as a society. This is not placing blame on one person, one family. This is not placing blame or guilt or pressure on families' choices. This is going to the root of the problem. So let me talk about a couple other things. Let's talk about milk donation, because that's been a hot topic too. So can you use donor milk? And I'm talking about informal milk sharing. So there is pasteurized donor milk that is distributed out to the sickest of the sick babies, and most often the NICUs. And that cost is not passed on to the family that needs it. That cost is absorbed either into the hospital or sometimes by insurance. The hospital gets reimbursed by insurance companies. So any other kind of milk is going to be unpasteurized and considered informal milk sharing. So when I discuss this with families, I talk about knowing the donor. That person needs to come vetted. You need to be able to trust them. Trust the person who has sent you to the person who has extra milk. They are open with you about their health history. They're open with you about medications they take. They're open with you about their social life. Is their baby thriving on their milk currently? That's another big question. Um, those are all questions that you should have between the donor and the recipient. This is not the lactation consultant's decision. This is the two of the people having a conversation about their lives. A few things I will say. Smoking cigarettes and breastfeeding is considered safe. It is safer for a woman safer for a baby, excuse me, safer for a baby to breastfeed from a smoking mother than formula feed from a smoking mother. Um, that's a big one. Medications involved. Postpartum depression medications, postpartum anxiety medications, hypothyroid medications. I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. They're safe. It is better for the baby to have human milk with the mother medicated than to receive formula. So when we're talking to donors, you're going to be having these conversations. What kind of medications are you taking? Do you socially drink alcohol? Do you socially responsibly drink alcohol? Alcohol in breastfeeding is not contraindicated. Should someone be an alcoholic? No. I don't care if you're formula feeding or breastfeeding or combo feeding. That's not good for anyone. And you probably can't care for a baby very well. But if a mother socially drinks with moderation, that's awesome for her. It's okay for her baby. And it's okay the milk she's pumping and has stored would be considered safe. So, I mean, maybe someone would be comfortable with that. Maybe they're more comfortable with formula. That's great. But in the crisis we're in, I really want people to understand that there's very, very little that a mother could do that would make her milk inappropriate or unsafe for the baby. Chemotherapy is one of them. Those toxins, the radiation, but typical medications that everybody takes, those are acceptable and aren't going to hurt her baby and probably not the recipient donor milk baby. Do not, whatever you do not buy human milk. Don't. Like, walk as quickly as you can away from that. If you see anything like that on social media, report it. Okay? It is not okay. Milk should always be given out of the generosity of someone's heart. It should not be about making a buck. I don't care if there's a formula crisis and you're saving someone. Do not sell your milk. That person cannot be trusted. Okay? I get so angry about this. So my head is going a little bonkers. But that person could be diluting milk. They might not tell you the truth about their social history, about their medication use. We might not know if their baby's thriving. Maybe they want to sell milk just to make money and they have a stash of formula they can feed their baby. I don't know, but selling milk is not okay. Do you want to give someone some milk storage bags because they're providing you with donor milk? That's awesome. That's a great way to kind of show your appreciation, but do not accept milk that you are buying. Okay? That run fast away from that and report. Okay. What else was I going to say? Okay. So, if someone has extra, and I work with a lot of those moms. I work with a lot of moms who need extra, need formula supplementation, and I work with moms who have extra and are trying to figure out what to do with it. So here's what I want to start off saying. It is not any one person's burden to bear to solve this problem, to solve this crisis. Women who have extra that have had a plan to stop pumping at some point and be able to provide their milk for beyond their weaning. women who've had an oversupply. Sorry, my knuckle popped. Women who've had an oversupply and, have been stashing and have been dealing with recurring plugs and, reoccurring mastitis, and it's been a nightmare. And they're like, oh, well, maybe I should donate this milk, but I'm scared to donate this milk. Like, what if I need it? I feel guilty for having extra milk in my freezer. I hear that all the time now. It is not their responsibility to save other people's babies. If you're going to donate and you have extra, donate in small amounts. Start slow. If you're close to 9 months, that's usually when I tell people that it's safe to donate. If they want to donate to a donor human milk bank, they will only accept milk under 1 year postpartum. So 9 months is kind of a nice time to start thinking about donating to a Habana milk bank, Human Milk Bank of North America. Those are the pasteurizing milk banks that send it to those sick NICU babies. But if you're wanting to informally share, it's safer when you get to like that 9-month mark because you're so close to 1 and the needs for volume have really decreased then. And you can kind of have a better picture of where you're at. Because once you do give it away, you can't ever get it back. Okay. And you never know what's going to happen. I mean, many of you listening to me right now may be like, I thought I was fine. And 3 months later, I wasn't. So you just don't know. So small volumes. And, certainly if you're in connection with a lactation consultant, she can kind of help you like weigh what to do. Like, what's your current situation? Are you working? What are you pumping? How's breastfeeding going? How's your baby going? How much do you have in storage? How much do we think we can safely donate to someone? Definitely just keep in mind that I get it that you want to. I think it's amazing. I think stuff like this is really wonderful when it can show like how people come together and we all want to help. But the other thing, I forgot that. I just saw my note. Human milk doesn't really ever expire. You're going to see stuff from the AAP and the CDC and the World Health Organization and the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. And what we do know as far as research and evidence and science of it all is there's studies for milk under 1 year postpartum. So that's why you hear that. You hear in the freezer, safe for 6 months in the deep freeze, 6 months and a year in the deep freeze. We don't have research past a year, but as long as it's kept frozen, as long as it's kept frozen at the proper temperature, it doesn't suddenly become not human milk. It's not going to have contamination. I mean, if the bags are sealed, they haven't defrosted, they're not warm to the touch to possibly grow bacteria. It's just milk, everything, not just human milk. Everything when stored, it loses some of its yummy. Okay, it just does. And human milk being the most shelf-stable milks compared to any other kind of food, can be safe to give to your baby, provided it was always kept frozen, much, much, much longer past 1 year postpartum. So I just say, like, there's no rush to use it. And I do have some videos on a lot of these topics. I'm just like kind of sneaking in there. So no rush to use the extra, and or if someone has milk that's 18 months postpartum, in their freezer, and they're like, I'd be happy to give you 500 ounces of this milk. I just want to tell you, it's from 18 months ago. If it was me, I would take that in 1/10 of a second over trying to find formula. I would do that way over anything. You have to remember, human milk is designed for human babies. So it's going to be more appropriate, even if outside some of those standards and guidelines, than formula milk in a can or ready to feed in a factory, distribution center, all of that stuff. Okay. FYI, there has never, ever, ever, ever been a recall on donor milk, ever. So good, fun stat there. Okay. What do we do if someone wants to create extra milk? So this might be a mom who is 2 months in and breastfeeding and is thinking, I'm going to make extra milk. I'll do that. I'm going to pump an extra time every day and I'm going to supply this person with extra milk or this amount of milk every day. Okay. Number one, get in contact with a lactation consultant, please, because this is not as easy as it sounds. And there's a lot of nuances to milk making that often are misunderstood. So there's something called the House of Milk, and this is a video that I have, and it talks about establishing milk supply. And just real briefly, it's in that first month postpartum that your body is triggered to be able to know how much milk to make moving forward. So, however much milk someone's going to be able to make, so like their full capacity, is pretty much determined within a month. And I'm talking full term healthy babies, I'm not talking about my NICU pump dependent moms. They have longer, definitely. So, if someone is past that point, then it's going to be harder for her body to suddenly just make more milk without taking milk away from what the baby needs. So if someone's farther along postpartum and they do an extra pump in the middle of the day or after the baby breastfeeds, they're taking that milk that the baby needed for the next feed. So we need to work very carefully to talk about when the most appropriate time would be to do an extra pump session and if it's appropriate. In some cases, it's not going to be appropriate. She's too far postpartum to be able to suddenly make more milk without impacting her current breastfeeding or breast milk feeding baby. A great time is if baby has a super long stretch of time where they are not breastfeeding or bottle feeding. And, if they're sleeping through the night, which FYI, scientifically speaking, is 5 hours without waking. So if a baby is doing that, a great time for that mom to like do an extra pump session is during that time. She could wake up in between that pump time or in between that sleep time, pump, and that could be the extra donatable milk that she can provide. Maybe the baby's sleeping a lot longer than 5 and she can wake up and pump a couple of times. Those are great opportunities for that. So what was that I wrote down? I did talk about how supplements, aside from the 2 prescriptions ones we talked about there, are pretty much useless. There's a ton of documented research proving that supplements do not increase milk supply. And if they do, it is a placebo, because when we feel like we're doing something and we feel better, guess what happens? We relax and then we can get a little bit more milk. It doesn't make someone go from making 3 ounces a day to 24 ounces a day. But sometimes it can make a little bit of a difference like that because your brain's relaxed, your cortisol is down, and that allows your oxytocin to come up. Okay, so the other thing, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Okay. Okay, so sorry, give me a hot minute. Yes. Okay, so people who are pregnant right now, I'm working with some of these families and they are understandably so nervous. These families that I'm working with are ones that are intending to breastfeed and or pump. But they are nervous on if they'll be able to. Can they? Can they do it? Will they supply enough milk? At some point, will they be involved in this formula crisis? They really, really don't want to be, as no one does. So they're feeling an extra amount of stress. I mean, here we go. 2019, 2020, 2021, super stress about COVID. And here we are, middle of 22 with formula crisis. So our poor pregnant moms have been through the ringer the last 3 years. So There's a lot of education that needs to happen when you are pregnant. I know it's been an hour, but I do have a few more things to say, so I'm going to keep talking. And everybody's going to get to watch this as a recorded video instead of live because I couldn't figure out all the whatever all those little things are that I look at on my computer. Um, so going to a support group while you're pregnant is one of the best things that you can do. You're allowed to go while you're pregnant without a baby and listen to the circle of moms talk about all the things, talking about their challenges, talking about how they overcame them, talking about what's normal, commiserating with each other. These support groups are led by a lactation consultant like myself. They're led by a La Leche League leader. Those are the two best kind of support groups to be going to. They are in person, and there's also online support groups too, one of which that I moderate myself. And I will say, I'm going to toot a horn here. I have I think I have six. I think I have almost 6,000 members in my Facebook group, which is invitation only, which means you're only allowed in if someone from the inside knows you and vets you. That helps keep this group safe, and that's really, really important to me. But I will tell you what, being in this group of mine, my stats, my breastfeeding report card for the group is remarkable. Most families are breastfeeding at 3 months. Most are breastfeeding at 6. Most are breastfeeding at 1. Most are breastfeeding past 1. And a lot of those families are either exclusive or with very partial supplementation. So my little family, my little community, our statistics are awesome. So way to go, everybody. So going to support groups when they're pregnant, taking a breastfeeding class, binging my YouTube videos, start learning now, because learning in the postpartum period is challenging. It's so hard. Your brain isn't ready for learning. You're in recovery mode. You are tired. It's so urgent because the baby is right there and needing to be fed. That's kind of the wrong time for learning. But if you do it beforehand, you're much better set up. Okay, we'll talk about that. So a couple little caveats I wanted to talk about as far as kind of the original, where this all stems from. Again, we wouldn't be in this formula crisis if the mothers who had the goal originally to breastfeed were properly supported to continue breastfeeding for as long as they desired. And that would allow, again, more formula for the people who medically need it and choose it. Okay, so that's why talking about breastfeeding during a formula crisis is important. That's why it can help prevent this from happening again. One of the things I mentioned earlier was the percentage of babies under 48 hours that are breastfeeding babies, breast pumping babies, given formula in that first 48-hour period. One of the things that people need to understand is that the newborn's stomach is teeny tiny, teeny tiny, teeny tiny. Oh darn, I didn't have my model ready to show. But it looks about the size of a marble, a regular marble. And oh, nice shout out. Hi, Mary. She says, I'm still breastfeeding at 3 years, planning to let my son continue as long as he wants. Your videos have helped us get through this far. Thank you. I'm so proud of you guys. That's really, really awesome. You've by 1 year surpassed the World Health Organization recommendation of a minimum of 2 years. So woot woot to you. Okay. So understanding what's normal in the first week postpartum can help set everybody up for success who wants to breastfeed, who want to be a pumping, breast milk feeding parent. So stomach capacity, because we have a teeny tiny tummy, which is probably like my fingernail, like it's about that big, holds about 5, maybe 7 ml. That's all. So it's super duper tiny. I sure wish I had it with me. And what that means, because we have a small tummy, the babies, is that they need frequent feedings. They need feedings not every 3 hours. That's what everybody hears. Every 3 hours, 8 times a day, maybe every 2 to 3. So we're thinking like, 10, 8, 10, maybe 12 times a day. No, newborns need to be feeding like 20 hours a day, all the time. They are feeding more often than they're not feeding. They are feeding for 45 minutes, taking a 10-minute break and hopping right back on. Okay. And it doesn't mean that you don't make enough milk. It doesn't mean that they're not full. It doesn't mean that they're starving. It doesn't mean you're inadequate. None of that. If you understand the process. So the house of milk, establishing your milk supply, is one of my top videos that everybody needs to watch. If you have any plans to breastfeed, partially breastfeed, breast milk feed, you got to watch it. Okay. It explains what's normal so that when you have a baby who wants to feed more often than every 3 hours, you're not thinking there's something wrong. And you're not thinking, I better supplement this baby with formula. The best way to, somebody said no sound. I think my sound is on. Hopefully it is. The best way to tell if your baby is getting enough milk is diaper output. And that is critical to pay attention to in the first week postpartum, even into the second week, until everything's really nice and established. That tells us if the baby's getting enough milk. And we're talking poop output. Pee output can be helpful, but can kind of be swayed if we have IV fluids before labor, if we've had a long labor with IV fluids, if we've had a cesarean section. That can sway it a little bit, but poop only happens if we're talking about digestion of human milk. So that really is a good tell. So frequent feeding is normal. You can't overfeed. Looking at those two things, house of milk and establishing milk supply, that video, and is my baby getting enough? Those two are critical to success. I also have a day of life video for every day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Watching those will help you understand what's normal. Couple really cool things. Skin to skin helps regulate blood sugar. Blood sugar is one of a common reason that becomes medical for supplementation. And I should clarify that supplementation means extra milk. It doesn't automatically mean formula. So supplementation can be with mother's expressed milk, and or formula, or if there's donor human milk available in the hospital, or informal donor milk, that's possible as well. But blood sugar is one of those things that can be medically necessary to give extra milk. One of the ways we can avoid that is skin to skin. Just by being on the mother's body, naked baby, on mother's skin, head here, upright, in between the chest. That's where we see the medical benefit of skin to skin, that particular positioning. And that can help raise and stabilize baby's blood sugar in that first 48 hours when they need help, because suddenly they're born and they got to do it themselves. And you've been doing it all along otherwise. So that's extremely important. No separation between mom and baby. When mom and baby are separated, cortisol levels in both of them go up. And when we have cortisol high, we use more energy. So we need that baby to be staying with mother, which one of the important steps to successful breastfeeding, called the 10 steps towards successful breastfeeding, is rooming in. So staying with the baby, being able to recognize hunger cues, or we call feeding cues, and trusting that when the baby gives you a feeding cue, trust they know what they're talking about and listen to them every single time. Every single time. Do not doubt those feeding cues. You see, it's time to breastfeed. Okay, I don't care how much time has passed, how little time has passed. It's time because you are building the house of milk, and that baby is trying to establish a large supply. They are trying to tell your body to make a lot of milk. They are trying to get going pooping. They are trying to reduce bilirubin. They are trying to gain weight, and all of that is helped by more breastfeeding. Um, Hand expression needs to be taught. That is essential. Essential thing that every mother should know how to do is hand express. She can go into a spoon, she can go into a cup, it can be drawn up into a syringe and given to baby. And then we're supplementing using mother's milk. And speaking of that, if we need formula supplementation, the method of giving that supplementation doesn't have to be a bottle. And a lot of times shouldn't, just because the pure volume of milk the baby needs is so tiny. You can't bottle feed 5 ml. It's hard to bottle feed 10 ml. Those are amounts that are much easier given in a syringe or a cup or a spoon. Um, while I'm on that topic, I want to talk about what's written on the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, their protocol for supplementation, which is accessible by anyone. If you search for Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine and protocols, you will find this protocol. Who is the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine? It is a global, worldwide organization, all of medical doctors whose job is to promote, support breastfeeding, breast milk feeding, and provide evidence-based information and research and protocols to help hospitals, families, all of that stuff. They're kind of like they're not technically our governing body as a lactation consultant because that's IBLCE, excuse me, but they're big up there. And in this one, there's a chart that shows you what the stomach capacity of a baby is. And 0 to 24 hours, it is 2 to 10 ml is their capacity. 24 to 48 hours is 5 to 15 ml. 48 to 72 hours is 15 to 30 ml. We've finally gotten to an ounce. 30 ml is 1 ounce. 72 to 96 hours, so day 3 to 4, 30 to 60 ml, 1 to 2 ounces. I want to ask you something if you know this, and people will see this later, but guess how big the hospital provided ready to feed formula bottles are? 60 ml, 2 ounces. So people who are formula feeding or needing to supplement or chose to supplement and have those formula bottles in their room with a 1-day-old, 60 ml, when really 2 ml to 10 ml is appropriate. And after you use that formula within an hour, you have to throw it away. A, that's a lot of waste. A, that's formula companies wanting your baby to be overfed so they can stretch the baby's stomach, and then you need more formula and you'll buy more formula. Unfortunately, they really should be smaller. These containers should be 30 ml down. They should have some 15 ml containers, some 30 ml containers. They probably don't need 60 ml containers because by the time the baby is needing 60 ml, we're discharged. We're day 4 postpartum. So overfeeding can create a baby who's not as interested in breastfeeding because they're full. Discomfort, spitting up, all of that. Another thing I want to talk about briefly is some of the reasons that require supplementation, whether that be mother's expressed milk, donor milk, or formula. We're talking bilirubin, weight loss, breast pathology, which a lactation consultant should be going through your history and talking to you about, and method of supplementation and when to stop supplementation. That is a part that gets missed a lot. Someone goes home being told to supplement and there's no discussion about when to stop or what to do once you get home. And people come to me and then we kind of like square away a plan, especially with my triple feeding families, how to come away from that, if it's safe to come away from that. Really what we need is more education on breastfeeding and lactation and pumping. We need postpartum staff to be educated in what's normal and what isn't normal and what requires specialized care. We need lactation consultants that are allowed to educate the postpartum staff. Many, many hospitals will not pay for the extra time it would take for a lactation consultant to hold a course for all the postpartum staff to sit and listen to. Whether that's a prenatal class and talking about all of it, like the prenatal classes we teach expecting couples, it would be really good for them to have that education, but they don't want to pay that out. Nurses are expensive. They're well paid. They should probably be paid a heck of a lot more than what they are, especially right now with the strains of COVID. But there's a lot of politics involved where you have postpartum staff that doesn't have the education that they should. And that's not their fault. That's the fault of higher ups and decision making way, way, way above where they are. Everybody needs to be aware of the risks to lactation and to the baby and to the mother of unnecessary supplementation, unnecessary formula supplementation. They need to be aware of those that we're not just doling out supplementation for no reason at all. It can really trigger anybody down a path they didn't plan to go. Inflated birth weight is a very common experience that can make women, families feel like they're inadequate and they don't make enough milk, even though they do, and not know how to climb out of that. I'll end with a couple things. I'll end with a couple of things. Statistically speaking, less than 1% of the entire female population cannot make enough milk. That's a very small percentage and makes sense because nature is really, really smart and wouldn't make it be the other way, we wouldn't be here. I mean, yes, science is here, and so we have formula, but when you think about it on a basic level, less than 1%. Now, there's perceived. That is a huge problem, is that there's a perception that a parent does not make enough milk. Huge perception. That's where the education comes in. You know, the common one, my baby's feeding so frequently, they're nursing every 30 minutes and they're staying on the breast. They never come off. They won't lay in their bassinet. I must not make enough milk. I need to supplement with formula. If she had the education on what's normal in the first week postpartum, on stomach capacity, on the reason for frequent feeding, she wouldn't have that perception and she would keep breastfeeding. So, in the end of this, we want, again, I've said this now, this will be the third time, we want everybody to be able to feed their babies the way they want to feed their babies. Unfortunately, many families in this formula crisis didn't want to be feeding formula. They didn't start out there, and they were failed by the system. They were given misinformation. They were led down the wrong path, and now they're here. If they weren't here and they were led the right way and guided properly and with the correct, a great LC and a supportive physician and postpartum staff that's awesome, the formula crisis wouldn't be here. The formula would be available for the people that medically need it and for the people who choose to formula feed. So please know, this didn't end up the way I wanted because I wanted much more interaction. But this is my first YouTube live, and I didn't do great with the computer aspects. I know boobs, I don't know computers. But please know, if you don't know me, I am someone who really wants to support people where they want to go. And I want to honor their needs. And those are very specific and different for everybody. I'm not somebody who's pushing an agenda. I want people to have the accurate information. I want them to know the facts. And I want them to make decisions knowing everything. knowing the risks they're entering, knowing the pros, knowing the cons, just informed consent. I want people to have that. And then you do you. I think that's, let's see, hold on. Oh, yes. Sorry, Daisy asked a question. Can you please give advice for hyperlactation, specifically for the postpartum phase when building milk supply? I did have that written down and I didn't go there, and that's important. So for these expectant parents or newly postpartum families right now who want to give and are in the house of milk phase, so under that 1 month postpartum where they can very easily create extra milk. It doesn't come without risks. Hyperlactation is a pain in the A. And for most women, it's not seamless. There's a very few women, like there's a few women that I work with that like they have hyperlactation and have never had any consequences from it. That's cool. It's unusual. Most women deal with recurring mastitis, breast abscesses, which is like, aside from cancer, is like the worst monster complication of lactation. Plugged ducts, constant unrelieved engorgement. And just FYI, engorgement feels like your breasts have been filled up with cement, or like a balloon has been blown up inside your breast and will pop. It's not fun whatsoever. So you feel like the constant need to pump or breastfeed. And then a lot of times the consequences for baby is being waterboarded with milk, drowning anytime they try to breastfeed, fussy at the breast aversion, major gassiness, most likely frothy poops that are highly gaseous and bubbly, and because most of the time the baby is relying on letdown milk because the mom just like fire hoses out of there. And what that can lead to is a lazy feeder, because that baby doesn't have to latch on properly in order to get milk, which is what we want. And so they just lay there and milk pours out. So then they can learn a weak suck. And if mom's supply eventually regulates, then baby starts nursing poorly, has a crummy suck, doesn't know how to get the milk out, and then gets frustrated. So hyperlactation sucks. It's not fun. And for either party can lead to full-on weaning. Maybe the mom has to end up exclusively pumping and, maybe has plenty of stored milk, but hates exclusively pumping because anytime she's pumping, the baby's crying while they wait for milk, and has to quit, or the baby just ends up with feeding aversion in general. I mean, it's one of those like things that can just get bigger and bigger and bigger into complication, especially when we know that every time you have a baby, you make more milk every single time. So second time moms are at more risk of just naturally having a hyperactive letdown and possible hyperlactation. Third time moms, fourth time moms. If you had your first and you had it, you're probably going to have it your second. It can be managed. And women who are experiencing hyperlactation absolutely need a special plan, period. You need to get with a lactation consultant. She can go through your entire history and figure out a plan of how to slowly bring down your supply without experiencing plugs, mastitis, abscesses, and how to bring it down so it's more manageable for baby. At what point postpartum you can do that, because that matters too. So, if we're early on in postpartum, if somebody wants to pump extra, and let's say this group of people is under, 4 weeks postpartum. A lot of times the best time to do a session, an extra pump session, would be immediately after a breastfeed, first thing in the morning. We make more milk in the early morning hours and the rest of the day. And immediately, the reason you immediately do it is because breastfeeding brings your hormones, milk making hormones high. And so if after breastfeeding you pump, then you're going to take advantage of those high hormones and likely collect more. And when you bunch two activities together, you have more time doing nothing. So even just one pump a day, like, would be some milk that you could donate to someone. Maybe you do 2 pumps a day. A lot of times I have my moms do 1 pump a day extra anyway that are going back to work and separating from baby. And I talk about that in another video, but so maybe they would want to do that plus a second extra pump. But you want to kind of make the decision and then hang tight with it, because especially during that first week when original engorgement happens, it feels really good to do that extra pump. It feels relieving and your breast feels soft and, they're no longer hard. And then it can become addictive because you want to do it again because you get engorged again. And you're like, oh, well, if I pump, it'll feel soft again. And then you do it again and it's not giving you relief. It's just telling your body to keep doing it again. So, and then you do it a third time and then a fourth time. And then you end up breastfeeding and pumping after every single session. And you end up making twin or triplet milk. And then it becomes a full-time job. Then all you're ever doing is breastfeeding and pumping. I have a mom of twins right now, and it is her fourth pregnancy or fourth set. So she has 3 older ones and now a set of twins, and has always had hyper milk making. And she's making a gallon of milk a day in excess, and has to keep pumping in order to feel comfortable, along with feeding her twins. So hyperlactation is a real problem. Most of the time is not fun. And again, it shouldn't be the burden or the responsibility of any of you that are currently making milk to solve this formula crisis problem. If you can do small little things here and there, then absolutely do it. We've gone through many things tonight. I'll just recap. We've gone through the formula brands and how to be able to find ones that will work for you, even if it's a different brand, what's safe and what's not homemaking formula, how you can incorporate foods and cow milk at certain age. We've talked about relactation. We've talked about induced lactation. We've talked about system failure, hospital policies, the breastfeeding report card. We've talked about stomach capacity and kind of what's incredibly important in the first week postpartum for those with the goal to breast milk feed and breastfeed, so that they can keep doing it and help the people have the formula they need, who need it and have always desired it. We've talked about pregnancy. We've talked about informal milk donation. We've talked about how to create extra. And I feel like we've talked about a lot. So I'm going to stop talking. Hopefully this can be shared. And see, there's one other person that said something. That's awesome. So USC Trojan says, thank you for touching on this. My baby is 2 months old. My production has slowed, but thankfully I am still able to nurse him exclusively. That's awesome. Yeah, milk production usually regulates between 6 and 8 weeks. Hyperlactation folks usually they're going to probably have to wait a little longer. But it does usually regulate, and babies usually get better at getting the milk, but there are some extreme cases, which are the ones that I usually see. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope this formula crisis ends soon. I hope we can avoid doing it and having it occur in the future. I hope this helps everyone have a few more tools in their pocket or in their toolbox to help them manage through this, or, my pregnant and newly postpartum families, help you understand what all of this means. But stay connected with your lactation consultant, stay connected with your physician, and we will help you navigate. So everybody have a great evening. Thanks for your time and your grace and understanding and how this ended up. Okay, bye everybody. See you. Oh, and if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please do. Done naturally. So I'm signing off. I'm Summer Friedmann, based here in Kansas City. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Facebook, all done naturally. And I will see everybody later. Thank you. See you later.